A conceited millionaire decided to mock a poor homeless man. He bought a scrawny, limping horse of no value and gifted it to him in front of everyone, just to laugh at his misery. But what happened afterward turned the mockery into a profound lesson that completely changed the course of the story. The homeless man's name was Samuel, a pale-faced man dragging behind him a rusty cart filled with bottles and cardboard. No one ever greeted him or even noticed him. On market mornings, he would sit in his usual corner behind an abandoned old stall, watching people. Women carrying fruit, men in elegant suits, children running about, a world that moved on without him. That day was different. The town square was filled with luxury cars, flags, and loudspeakers. It was the annual horse auction, where the wealthy flaunted their power by buying purebred horses. Samuel knew horses well. He had worked with them long ago, but his loneliness and poverty had reduced him to a shadow on the margins of life. As he watched, a young rich man named Arnaldo passed by with his friends. Smirking as he noticed Samuel, a cruel idea struck him. He would buy the worst horse in the auction and present it as a gift to that wretched man. He offered 100 pesos for a weak, limping horse, blind in one eye with tangled hair, and ordered it to be handed over to Samuel. The square froze for a moment, then erupted in laughter and ridicule. An assistant approached, holding the reins. Samuel remained still. He looked into the horse's eyes and saw the same brokenness he himself had lived. Slowly, he rose, took the reins with tired hands, and gently stroked the animal's neck amid the roaring laughter. He whispered, "We don't know where we're going, but from now on, we won't be alone." He left the square slowly, dragging his weary feet alongside the horse's stumbling steps. The laughter and mockery stayed behind, but his heart felt no anger, only a familiar sting, the old wound of humiliation. He walked through dark alleys, past crumbling houses and hungry dogs, until he reached an empty lot surrounded by rusty wires and the remains of an old stable. There he stopped, looked at the horse, and said, "Here, you will be safe." For the crowd, it had been nothing but a cruel joke to amuse the rich. For Samuel, it was the beginning of a new chapter. In that rejected horse, he saw a reflection of himself. He decided to give it what no one had ever given him, a chance. He released the reins and began clearing the rubble with his bare hands until he found a small corner with a solid roof. He spread out some warm blankets he had gathered from the streets and made a bed for the horse. At first, the animal did not move. Samuel went to a nearby dumpster, fetched a rusty bucket of water, and offered it. The horse drank slowly while Samuel sat beside him, watching, and murmured softly, "They gave you as a mockery, just as life gave me cruelty and scorn. I won't blame you if you don't trust anyone." Night fell. The village lights glowed in the distance, while that corner was drowned in heavy silence, broken only by the horse's breathing. Samuel closed his eyes, drifting into memories of the family he had lost, the hand of his son, the voice of his wife, a life that had slipped away. Suddenly he felt a gentle touch on his leg. The horse had approached shyly, nudging him with its muzzle as if asking something. Samuel raised his hand and placed it on the animal's neck. He felt the roughness of its hair, but beneath it, a warmth still alive. He whispered, "You will be called Fossil. Everyone thinks you're finished, but you will prove them wrong." The horse stood quietly beside him, as if a silent pact had been sealed. And for the first time in years, Samuel felt companionship. He didn't need words or human embrace, just the presence of the horse was a profound comfort. That night, he did not dream of his past, but of a horse running free, and of himself running beside it. At dawn, he awoke with a stiff back, but he did not complain. He found Fossil stretched out on the blankets, sleeping peacefully. For the first time in a long while, Samuel felt he was not alone. He pulled from his sack a withered carrot, some stale bread, and a little oatmeal mixed with water. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. The horse ate slowly while Samuel watched him, as though guarding a fragile flame in a storm. After the meal, he began cleaning the animal's legs with a worn cloth. He noticed swelling, old wounds and cracked hooves. The smell was strong, but he did not recoil. He had lived his life among horses and knew that behind the weary body was a spirit that had not yet surrendered. Hours passed as he repeated the routine: water, cleaning, rest. At first, Fossil trembled at every touch, but little by little he grew calmer, his breathing steadying. By noon, Samuel decided to take him for a short walk. The horse hesitated, his legs shaking, but the man did not force him. He walked a few steps, then stopped, waiting patiently before moving again. In time, Fossil followed. They walked a few meters down an empty side street, the only sounds the uncertain clop of hooves and the taut rope. After a few steps, the horse stopped, exhausted. Samuel leaned close and whispered, "It doesn't matter how far you go. What matters is that you stay standing." Some neighbors saw them. An old man watched from his window, then drew the curtain. Children laughed mockingly, the horse weaker than its mad master. But Samuel did not care. He had learned that mockery no longer wounded him, it only made him stronger. He returned to the ruined stable, gave Fossil water, then sat beside him. The horse lay down near him, as though they shared the same fate. Samuel spoke softly. "When a man is despised, all that remains is to prove he still has worth." Before sleeping that night, he lit a small candle he had kept for months. It was not a ritual, nor a habit, but a symbol of a new beginning. Its flame flickered in the wind, but did not go out, like Fossil, like Samuel himself. At the break of another grey, silent morning, he rose slowly, searching with his eyes for the horse. He found him lying on the blankets. He placed his hand on the animal's warm neck and said, "Good morning, my friend. We are still here." He took a broken brush and began combing the tangled hair gently, as if it were a shared language between them. While working, he whispered, "They once gave me away like you, as if I were a burden with no value. But we will prove them wrong." The name Fossil had come to Samuel without thought. He had not chosen it because the horse was old or broken, but because fossils remain as witnesses that something great once existed and never truly disappeared. Half smiling, he said, "That is why I'll call you Fossil, because you are still here, even though everyone thinks you are worthless." The horse lifted his head slightly as if answering, and though his eyes were clouded, they were no longer empty. Samuel spent the day repairing the dilapidated stable, clearing rubble, patching holes with worn plastic, arranging what little scraps he had. They were not just small tasks, but a declaration that he was still capable of building. At sunset, he took Fossil for a short walk through the neighborhood. The horse walked with more steady steps, though still limping. This time, people did not laugh. They only watched in silence and curiosity. That evening, Samuel placed a warm compress on the horse's swollen leg, then lay down beside him. He did not think of tomorrow, only of the day that had passed. A single candle flickered in the corner, making him feel something he had long forgotten: hope. Before sleep, he whispered, "We will get through this, Fossil. You and I, even if no one believes in us." The horse exhaled strongly as if in agreement. On the third day, Samuel knew every detail of the stable and every wound on his companion's body. The injuries were healing slowly, and the limp was lighter than before. He cared for him with warm water, old bandages and primitive remedies, ashes mixed with ground herbs and clay. It was not a perfect cure, but it was given with sincere care. While cleaning the hooves, he discovered a deep crack, not new, but the result of years of neglect. He touched it gently and saw the horse shudder in pain. He murmured, "Even your soul aches, like mine." He sat beside him, and the horse lowered his head to touch Samuel's leg with his muzzle. A simple gesture, but to Samuel it was like a hand resting on a burdened shoulder. Their bond was no longer mere companionship, but a mutual recognition between two outcasts. Their fractures had joined to form a new image, broken yet beautiful. That afternoon, Samuel went to the market in search of food, not for himself, but for Fossil. He rummaged behind shops until he found a bag of spoiled vegetables. He hurried back, passing a group of teenagers. One of them jeered, "Here comes the tamer of dead horses." But Samuel did not respond. He had learned that silence was stronger than mockery. When Fossil saw him return, he lifted his head. Samuel fed him a rotten apple, cut into small pieces. For the first time since his arrival, Fossil let out a short sound, not of pain but of relief. Samuel sat beside him, wiping his back with a clean rag, whispering, "I thought you were like me, about to give up, but you were only waiting for someone to truly see you." As evening fell, he lit the candle again and leaned against a torn blanket. Looking at the horse, he said, "I don't know how we'll manage, but I will not leave you. You have taught me that there is still worth in trying." At midnight, the rain began to fall, first as a distant whisper, then as a continuous hymn on the tin roof. Samuel rose and covered Fossil with an old blanket. The horse slept with a peace he had never known before. The man sat listening to the rhythm of the rain, and within him deep memories began to seep through. He saw his childhood on his father's farm, the morning fog, the horses being trained with patience, not force. His father's voice, "Do not break a horse with violence, but with respect." He remembered his first horse, Sombra, a frightened foal that took weeks before it accepted the touch of his hand. That day, he felt he had found his calling. Then came the reel of happiness, his wife, Clara, and her laughter, his son Nico, playing among the stables, the days of work under the sun, the smell of hay and clean leather. A whole life that now seemed to belong to another time. But decline came gradually, drought that ruined the crops, debts piling up, friends abandoning him, anger, then alcohol, endless arguments with Clara. And then that accident, rain, a car that did not stop, the sound of a siren, a hospital, and his wife's face heavy with sorrow as she said, "I can't do this anymore." She left with their son and never returned. From that day, he became a wanderer without direction, until Fossil came. The horse was like a mirror reflecting his pain, but also a window toward new hope. In those clouded eyes, Samuel found a reason to stay alive. He looked at Fossil sleeping under the blanket, approached with the candle, and studied his dirt-stained eyelids, the scars on his legs, the dim eye still searching for light. Then he understood the truth. He was not only caring for the horse, he was healing himself through him. Every bandage, every touch, every whispered word was a rebuilding of his shattered soul. He murmured with a resolve he had not felt in years, "I will bring you back to your feet, my friend, even if it's the last thing I do." The rain continued outside, but it no longer felt cold. It was a cleansing of his old sins. At dawn, Samuel went out into the mud, gathered eucalyptus leaves, and prepared a simple brew mixed with bran. Fossil drank it without resistance, then stood on his feet for a full moment, swaying but standing. Samuel's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow but of life returning. The days followed like seasons. He no longer measured time by hours but by Fossil's steps. If the horse stood on his own, if he ate without struggle, if he lifted his head toward him, that was a good day, and most days became good. Each morning, Samuel went out searching for food, gathering scraps of bread and wilted vegetables. Some vendors came to know him and began leaving a small box for him in silence. He would answer only with a grateful smile. When he returned, the horse greeted him with a flick of the ear. Samuel always fed him first, brushed him, cleaned his hooves, and spoke to him as if he understood every word. "Look at this apple. It's not pretty, but it's sweet inside, just like us." Fossil chewed slowly, and Samuel laughed softly, as if it were a small victory. In the afternoons, they walked together through the alleys of the neighborhood. Short steps, but each carried a new promise. The horse no longer stopped every meter, no longer startled at every sound. He walked beside Samuel as though guarding him. People began to notice the change. The mockery was gone. Some greeted him with a nod. Others stepped aside in quiet respect for the strange sight. One day, a small child approached holding a piece of biscuit. Shyly, he asked, "Can I touch him?" Samuel nodded. The boy stretched out his trembling hand, and the horse did not move. "He's soft," the boy said, "and big." Samuel smiled and added, "And kind too." The child ran back to his mother, leaving the biscuit on a stone. Good horses deserve a prize. Samuel broke it in half and gave it to Fossil, saying, "You've got admirers now." That moment stayed carved in his heart for days. At night, Samuel cleaned the stable, arranged his few tools, and lit the candle in the corner. He began to notice details he had never seen before. A white patch on Fossil's neck, shaped like a crescent moon, the way his jaw tilted slightly to the left when he relaxed, the deep sound of his breathing in sleep, like a human sigh. These small signs became his measure of peace. One evening, as he stroked the horse's back, he leaned his forehead against his body and whispered, "I never thought this was possible. You've given me back what I thought was dead, the meaning of days, peace, responsibility, maybe even faith again." The horse did not answer, and he did not need to. Their bond had grown deeper than words, a silent pact sealed by actions. At sunset, Samuel took out an old piece of wood and a rusty knife. Slowly, he carved until the shape of a simple horse appeared. He placed it beside the candle and said, "So we never forget where we began." That night, the rain returned in torrents, but the roof they had patched with rags and planks held firm. They sat close together, the candle flickering but never going out. Samuel closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he did not fear the night, because he was no longer alone. At the break of a clear morning, he rose early. His body was weary, but his heart was calm. Fossil stood up on his own and let out a strong breath, as if declaring a challenge. Samuel smiled. "At this pace, you'll be flying soon." After putting everything in order, he walked into the center of town. The streets were alive with noise, trucks, merchants, children. He moved unseen among the crowd, and to him that invisibility felt like freedom. He passed through the square where his pride had once been wounded at the auction. He remembered the laughter, the sound of the gavel, but now the pain was nothing more than a stone in his pocket. Heavy, yes, but no longer stopping him from walking. While searching behind a bakery for scraps of bread, his eyes caught a new announcement posted on the central kiosk. A red board with golden letters read, "The Great Endurance Race of San Gabriel. Open to all, no entry fee. Horses of every kind welcome. Prize, 10,000 pesos and a contract with the local equestrian club." Samuel read it once, then again, his eyes shining. Fate had opened a door he had never expected. He stood before the announcement in the town square, listening to a group of young men speaking excitedly about the great race. Riders would come from other villages. One of the Montiel sons would compete with his new horse. It was Arnaldo himself, the very man who had staged the cruel play with the beggar. At the sound of that name, Samuel clenched his fist. It was not anger, but an awakening, something stirring deep inside him. He returned to the stable in silence, a single question echoing in his mind. Could Fossil run? Not for the prize, not for revenge, but to prove that dignity cannot be bought, and that strength does not belong only to wealth and lineage. He stood before his horse, looked into his clouded eyes and said, "What do you say, my friend? Can you try?" There was no answer, but in the animal's eyes flickered a new spark. Samuel began brushing him, whispering, "We don't need to win. It's enough to show that we did not give up." That evening, he took him on a longer walk than usual along the dry riverbed. Fossil struggled, stopping often in pain, but Samuel encouraged him, step by step, never rushing. When they returned, both were exhausted, but in the horse's eyes there was a new light, as if together they had crossed their first barrier. That night, Samuel placed a handwritten copy of the race announcement in a small box beside his bed. It became a promise, one that could not be broken. At dawn, he began preparing. He reinforced the stable with old planks and stones and built a small training ring. He had no tools, no stopwatch, but his memory carried his father's lessons, endurance drills, circular movements, gradual effort. He placed 3 stones apart and made Fossil walk back and forth between them. At first, the horse stumbled, but with Samuel's calm voice and steady hands, his steps grew firmer. "One steady step, old one. Speed doesn't matter." Their days became a new routine. In the mornings, Samuel gathered scraps of food from the markets. Some merchants had begun leaving him a small box in silence, and he answered only with a grateful smile. On returning, he always fed Fossil first, cleaned his hooves, treated his wounds, then led him through simple exercises. At noon, they went on short walks and sometimes at night, out onto the dirt roads beyond the town. The community around them changed as well. People no longer mocked as before. Some greeted him with a nod. Others watched in quiet wonder. One day, a boy approached, carrying a piece of biscuit. He stroked Fossil gently, then left it for him, saying, "Even good horses deserve a prize." Samuel smiled, broke it in half, and fed it to the horse. "You have admirers now." That moment stayed in his heart for days. At night, he lit the candle in the corner, placed beside it the small wooden horse he had carved, and sat watching the flame. Each flicker felt like a symbol of the bond between him and his companion. He noticed the smallest details. The white patch on Fossil's neck, shaped like a crescent, the slight tilt of his jaw when he relaxed, the deep sound of his breathing in sleep like a human sigh. These signs became his measure of peace, telling him that all was well. As the days passed, the training grew harder. He built hurdles from dry branches, marked paths with old ropes, and used the riverbank as a natural boundary. They began with long walks, then light runs over short distances. The performance was neither fast nor graceful, but the will was unmistakable. Samuel encouraged his friend without pause. "We are not gods, Fossil. We are flesh, blood, and memory, and that is enough." One night, under a sky full of stars, Samuel drew a straight line on the ground with his staff. He stepped back and called out, "My friend, just to here." The horse set off, not elegantly, but with determination. His hooves struck the earth with force, and in his eyes shone a brilliance Samuel had never seen before. When he reached the line, Samuel embraced him in a silent hug. It was not a sporting achievement, but a triumph of dignity itself. The sessions continued in this way. In public, Samuel remained the ragged beggar who collected scraps of food, but at dawn he became a trainer, a believer, a companion on a journey to reclaim life. He treated Fossil's legs with herbs mixed with clay, listened to his breathing, and to the inner voice that reminded him of his father's lessons. Respect is not imposed, it is earned. Horses, like people, can tell the difference between truth and empty words. One evening, after a long day, Samuel sat by the fire, staring at his calloused hands. He could not remember the last time his palms had been marked by the traces of real work. He whispered, "We are not strong nor young, but we are alive. And that is more than I have dreamed of in years." Then he rested his forehead on his horse's back and said, "Thank you for giving me a new reason to stand." That night, he did not dream of the past, but of a racetrack under the sun, an old horse running beside him, and a weary, broken man who was, at last, free. As the weeks passed, Fossil was able to run for half an hour straight, slow steps, but steady. Each time he finished training, he would approach Samuel, asking for the touch of his hand, as if it were his own private applause. One dawn, Samuel sat on a rock, exhausted. His shoes were torn, his hands rough, but his face glowed with hope. The horse came close and placed his muzzle on Samuel's shoulder. Samuel whispered back, "I swear if I could, I would run with you. But you will do it for me." He wrote on a scrap of paper, "This alone is victory." He pinned it above the little wooden horse. Then he began planning harder routes, climbing hills, crossing obstacles. One night, he told Fossil, "We'll visit the racetrack soon. Not to compete, just to know it." He wrapped the horse's neck with a blanket and kissed him in gratitude. Fossil was no longer just an animal, he was a companion on a journey. But in town, rumors began to spread. The beggar intends to enter the race. Some laughed, others mocked. Maybe he wants to die on the track. Arnoldo, meanwhile, treated it as a new joke at the club. He shouted mockingly, he accepted the gift and now thinks he can compete. It will be the best comedy show yet. Everyone laughed. No one objected. Samuel did not know, or perhaps he ignored it. His focus was fixed on training. Fossil grew stronger, climbing slopes, enduring strain. At night, Samuel washed his legs with herbs and clay, whispering, "We will not fail, old one. If you endure, I endure with you." Even when teenagers mocked him on the road, he did not stop. He walked on in silence, his resolve hardening. The list of participants was announced. 14 riders, 13 with purebred horses and famous names. The last name, written in plain black ink, Samuel Peña, Fossil. The announcer hesitated when reading it, and laughter rose from the crowd. But in the back rows, a small boy who had seen them before clapped and whispered to his mother, I want him to win." That night, Samuel held his final serious training session. Just one lap on the makeshift track he had built. Fossil did not run like a racehorse, but like a creature that knew both falling and rising. Every step was a declaration of life. Afterward, Samuel poured herbal water over his legs, then sat beside him, saying, "They mock us as always. But you reminded me who I am." He placed the registration paper in the wooden box with the little carved horse and said, "In a few days, we will stand before them. Not to win, but to say, here we are." The day of registration came. Samuel woke before dawn, fed Fossil, wrapped his legs carefully, and put on his least torn shirt and his worn-out shoes. He pressed his forehead to the horses and said, "Today we enter through the front gate, and we will not bow our heads." He crossed the same square where he had once been mocked, the same ground, the same stairs. But this time he walked with his head held high. Beside him, Fossil moved with slow, steady steps. They reached the registration desk. A young woman in uniform looked at him, then at the horse, astonished. "How can I help you?" "I've come to register," he replied. "Are you a rider?" she asked. Calmly, he answered, "No." "But this horse is—" She handed him a form. He wrote, "Samuel Peña, Fossil." Two young men behind him stifled their laughter. "You're entering with that animal." Samuel did not reply. He took his number, slipped it into his pocket, and walked away with quiet steps. Before he could leave, a child's voice called out, "Mister! Mister!" He turned and saw the same boy who had once touched Fossil. The boy ran toward him, holding a notebook, his face glowing. He stood before the horse, eyes wide, and asked, "Are you really going to race?" Samuel nodded with a smile. "Yes, we will try," the boy grinned. "My father says old horses can't race. But I told him your horse is different because you care for him as if he were a person." A lump rose in Samuel's throat. He bent down, touched the boy's head, and whispered, "What you just said is worth more than any prize." The boy handed him a paper. On it, drawn with clumsy lines, was a horse and a man crossing a finish line. Beneath it, the words, "You can do it." Samuel took the paper as if it were treasure. Back at the stable, he pinned it above the wooden horse. "Look, old one, we have a crowd now." The day of the race arrived. From dawn, the town square was alive with movement. Families, flags, loudspeakers, a festive atmosphere. Samuel, after a short sleep, rose with a different purpose. This was not an ordinary day. It was a day to face everything. He fed Fossil, wrapped his legs carefully, and covered him with a blanket. He put on his patched, clean shirt and looked into a rusty metal mirror. In his eyes, he saw something he had not seen in years, dignity. Before leaving, he folded the boy's drawing and placed it in his pocket. Then he lit the candle in the corner, an offering to what he had lost and to what he had regained. Today, we are not who we were. Today, we stand on the road to the square. He no longer walked with his head bowed as in the past, but with steady steps. People whispered, some laughed, some looked on in surprise, and others with a hidden admiration. He reached the gathering place of the riders and their teams, young horsemen in shining suits, gleaming helmets, and massive, muscular horses. And there he was, with torn shoes, a simple shirt, and a frail horse with a clouded eye. Yet what he lacked in ornament, he made up for with calm and with a clear gaze that needed no proof. One of the organizers handed him his number. "You'll be in the 14th position, the very last at the start." Samuel answered quietly, "We're used to starting from the bottom." Not far away, Arnaldo adjusted his gloves with an arrogant air. He approached and sneered. "I thought you'd be too afraid to even show up." Samuel replied, "A man only understands the value of something once he has lost it." The young man faltered, but said nothing. The judge stood on the platform. The distance is 5 kilometers, through rough paths, climbs and descents, and 2 narrow rivers. The winner is not the fastest, but the one who knows his horse and keeps him until the end. Samuel closed his eyes. In the judge's words, he heard the very secret of their bond. The signal was given. The riders shot forward like arrows, raising clouds of dust. Samuel, however, began slowly, whispering, "Steady steps, no rush, just as we trained." Some spectators laughed at the sight of the thin horse, lagging behind. But others watched in silence, among them the boy with the drawing, who shouted from his father's shoulders, "Go, Fossil! You can do it!" That voice awakened something in the horse. Fossil lifted his head and stretched his stride. By the end of the first lap, fatigue was already showing on some of the faster horses. One withdrew, others slowed, but Fossil kept his rhythm. Balanced steps, breathing deep like an old machine, steady and unbroken. At the first river, several horses balked, refusing to enter. Some riders whipped them harshly. Samuel leaned close to his companion's ear and whispered, "Water is like hardships, it doesn't scare those who face it." Fossil moved forward slowly, pushing through the mud until they reached the opposite bank. A shy applause began, then grew louder. By halfway through the race, they had overtaken several competitors. Some people could not believe their eyes. "Isn't that the beggar? He's passed them." But Samuel did not hear, or if he did not care. He was not running for their approval, but to keep the promise he had made before a candle and a horse. On the final climb, the path was narrow and steep. The remaining horses panted, some stumbling on the rocks. Samuel held the reins, leaned toward Fossil's neck, and said, "You know these rocks. Patience. Step by step." With every breath, he remembered the dawn trainings on the hill behind the stable. They advanced slowly, but they did not stop. When Samuel looked back, he realized only 3 riders remained ahead of them. The people on both sides fell silent. There was no more laughter, only astonished gazes. Phones began recording the scene. The horse, once given as an insult, and the man who had lived forgotten, were suddenly at the very heart of the race. They reached the final kilometer. The ground leveled out and the crowd gathered thick at the finish line. Some cheered for the famous riders, but other eyes followed the pair in a kind of sacred silence. Samuel did not change his pace. He knew that pushing the horse too hard could destroy everything they had built. He whispered, "To arrive with dignity is worth more than arriving first." "We have already won." The red ribbon appeared in the distance, flags snapping in the wind. Samuel did not look back. It no longer mattered who was behind him. He moved forward, and with him, Fossil ran, not in search of applause, but for a hidden recognition that they were still alive. A cloud of dust rose around them, the sun glinting off the sweat frozen on the horse's skin. Yet none of that concealed the truth. They were crossing the finish line, not as forgotten shadows, but as living proof that what is broken can rise again, and what is mocked can become a story worth telling. Victory in that moment was not measured by ranking or prizes, but by the fact that a broken man and a despised horse had together redefined the meaning of standing tall once more. The red ribbon fluttered in the wind, separating the watching crowd from those daring to cross. The riders arrived exhausted, their horses panting. Then Fossil appeared, not as a champion horse, but as one who had endured humiliation and had not been broken. Thin, dusty, yet stepping firmly with his head held high. Beside him walked Samuel, his face drenched in sweat and dust, but his eyes shining like lanterns at dawn. Silence spread until a child lifted his drawing and shouted, "Go, Fossil!" Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then strong, not for speed, not for medals, but for the humanity of the moment. The horse kept walking despite exhaustion, his heart driving his legs forward. Samuel whispered, "Just a few more steps, old one." Some riders removed their hats in respect. Others bowed their heads in shame, having judged too quickly. Only Arnaldo stood on the platform silent, helmet in hand, his face heavy with unease. The two crossed the finish line. The square exploded with applause. One of the judges approached and shook Samuel's hand. "You have given us a lesson." Samuel, looking at his horse, replied, "I only followed him. He was the one who led me." He knelt before Fossil in gratitude. "You brought me where I could not go alone." Then they withdrew to the shade of a tree, far from prizes and noise. They did not wait for honors. They had already gained what they sought. Some people quietly offered water or food. The child returned, carrying a red ribbon he had made himself. "This is your prize." Samuel tied it around Fossil's neck. "The truest prize I've ever received." On the other side of the square, Arnaldo sat with the second-place trophy in his hands, scowling. He had received applause and photographs, yet felt only emptiness. The image of the old man and his horse pierced his mind. His father sat beside him. "Second place isn't bad," but the young man muttered. "He didn't win, but he's the only one who mattered." His father laughed dismissively. "Don't let a beggar's story weaken you." Arnaldo stood, serious. "He taught me not to become like you." And he walked away, leaving his father in silence. Samuel and Fossil returned to the stable. The neighbors no longer looked at them with disdain. Some greeted them with respect. Children tried to come closer. The horse entered his corner and let out a sigh of relief. Samuel sat beside him, took out the child's drawing, and pinned it once more above the wooden carving. Before sunset, there was a knock at the door. Arnaldo stood there alone, holding a package. His voice was broken. "I don't deserve forgiveness. I just wanted to give you this." Inside were a brush, a new blanket, and hoof oil for Fossil. Samuel answered calmly, "Sometimes cruel gifts become the most precious things we own. What matters is what we make of them, not what is given." The young man's eyes trembled. He thanked him and left. The next morning, peace filled the stable. There were no crowds, no applause, only the feeling of an inner victory. Samuel rose early and found Fossil sleeping soundly. He was no longer a broken animal, but a noble being. Samuel cleaned the place with reverence, for it had become a sacred refuge. The child arrived carrying a new notebook. "I'm going to write a book about your story," Samuel smiled. When asked about the title, he replied, "The horse that brought us back to life." As the afternoon sun leaned toward the horizon, the director of the equestrian club arrived at the stable, a well-dressed man carrying a thick folder and a white envelope. He shook Samuel's hand. "I am Gustavo Farinia, representative of the equestrian club. What you did yesterday has inspired many. We would like to offer you a position as caretaker of the horses, with a salary and your own place. You could even train the young riders." Samuel paused, then asked, "And Fossil, will he come with me?" The man replied, "Of course." "We would never separate you." A long silence followed his words. Samuel lowered his eyes and said, "This stable is the only place I have had since I lost everything. Here, I found myself again." The man smiled. "And that is why we see you as the right one, because you can show the young that failure is not the end." Samuel asked for time to think, so the man left. That night, Samuel did not light the usual candle. He sat beside Fossil and opened the folder. Inside was a clean, simple contract. He did not open the envelope of money. It was not money that mattered to him. He lifted his gaze to his horse, then to the child's drawing pinned on the wall, and understood that the next step was not just work, but a crossing into a new life. At dawn, Fossil stood calmly, chewing his feed in peace. Outside, there was a knock at the door. Arnaldo Montiel entered, the rider who had once gifted the horse as an insult. This time, he carried no arrogance, no guards, but a framed photograph. Samuel and Fossil crossing the finish line through the dust, heads held high. "I found it among the official photos," the young man said. "I couldn't stop looking at it." "I wanted to give it to you." Samuel studied it for a long time, then asked, "And why did you really come?" Arnaldo's voice was hoarse. "Because I realized money doesn't buy everything. Courage sometimes grows in those we mock." I wanted to understand and to ask forgiveness. Samuel smiled faintly. "I don't need your apology. I only need you never to repeat what you did, not to a horse, not to a man." Then he opened the door wider. "Come in. Fossil doesn't bite." Arnaldo stepped forward nervously. He stretched out his hand and the horse approached calmly, as if accepting his apology in silence. The young man whispered, stroking his neck. "Thank you, my friend. You've taught me more than I ever imagined." A few days later, a family from town arrived with their little boy, the one who had made the first drawing. The father, Hector, offered Samuel work on their small farm. "We have an old stable that needs to be brought back to life. We want you to teach the young," his wife added. "Our children need more than riding lessons. They need to learn patience and humility." Samuel looked at Fossil, then at the boy, who waved his notebook and said, "If you accept, I'll draw the new stable for you." For the first time in years, Samuel laughed with genuine joy. "I accept." Samuel and Fossil moved to the farm. It was simple but spacious, with tall trees and a clean well. He began cleaning and repairing the stable. Soon, young people started coming, not only to learn horsemanship, but to hear his story. He spoke little, but his words sank deep. A horse is not tamed by force, but by steadiness and respect, just like life. They listened with moved faces. Fossil became a living legend, not for his speed, but because he had become a symbol of second chances. In the evenings, he was released into the fields, but he always returned to his stable as if he knew he had finally found his home. One day, Arnaldo returned again, but with a different expression. He handed Samuel a box containing the red cloth that had marked the finish line, now framed in wood. "I thought it belonged to you," Samuel replied. "I no longer need proof. But perhaps the world does." The young man sat watching the children cleaning the horses, then said as he left, "If you allow me, I'd like to help here one day." Samuel smiled. "The doors are open. But remember, here, we are all students." Time passed, and the farm became a place where souls were rebuilt. Samuel was no longer a forgotten beggar, but a teacher known to all. Fossil remained the heart of the place, a witness to a transformation no one had believed at first. One evening, the child hung a wooden sign at the entrance of the stable. In simple letters it read, "Fossil's stable, where the lost find their way again." Samuel stood gazing at it, smiling, tears shining in his eyes. He realized those words were not only for visitors, but for himself, for his horse, and for everyone who had once believed they were finished. He had become living proof that falling is not the end, but the beginning of another crossing across the line of forgetting into a new life.